Hello BookTube, this is my reading wrap-up for the month of September 2020. This is my first BookTube video, and I'm starting with a very, very good month. I read 10 books in September, and a lot of them were very fantastic, so let's talk about it. First video I read in the month of September is Sharp Ends by Joe Abercrombie. This should be read after the first trilogy and the standalone, but before the second trilogy. It's probably the least important thing. You can probably skip it if you really want to, but it's pretty good. It was a bit hit and miss for me. I really like a couple of the short stories. My favorite would probably be the first one, which follows a young Glocta. Well, it's about a young Glocta, and I like me some Glocta, because he's amazing. So that certainly helped with this. I know the last short story is probably the most popular. It is from the point of view of Method before the trilogy. And it was very interesting. I'm not a huge fan of what happened with Logan, which I can't talk too much about because obviously I can't talk about spoilers in a wrap-up video. But I found Logan to be less interesting from reading this. In the middle, there are just a few very lackluster ones. That's all the short stories in there. A Beautiful Bastard is great, but there's a lot of them that are just events that happened in the other books, but from someone else's point of view, which, well, it is interesting to see. It's a lot of it for a book. My two favorites were probably the Temple and the Glocta short story. And this also has an entirely new character. And the middle one, Wearing of the Blight in it, was my favorite of those. The others were a bit lackluster to me. Overall, I gave this a 5.8 out of 10. It was a 3-star book for me. I think it was overall, it was worth reading. It was more good than bad, but not overwhelmingly good. Fortunately for Mr. Abercrombie, the next thing I read during the month of September was A Little Hatred by Joe Abercrombie, and this was brilliant. I know some people like this less than the main trilogy. Some people like it more. I am definitely in the camp that likes this more than the main trilogy. Even though Glocta is my favorite overall, the original trilogy also has some characters, especially in book 1, who I was kind of on, mainly Pharaoh, who I'm still not a huge fan of. But the real two things that set this apart to me compared to the original trilogy was the relationships, because Joe Abercrombie's always been very, very good at voice. All his characters, you really get in their head and you see the world through their eyes. They all describe the world in a fundamentally different way. It's something from listening to talk, you can tell he puts a lot of effort into it. And it's still just as good here as it is in the main trilogy. But one thing that, I don't want to say a weakness of the first trilogy, because it wasn't by any means bad, but one aspect of his characterization that I thought was less fantastic was the relationship between those characters. They kind of, while they're very, very interesting on their own, they didn't have that many super interesting relationships. This book has some damn well fleshed out relationships. Especially Leo and there's two parent-kid relationships. Leo and his parent, and Savine and her parents, both of them. But those are very interesting. You should definitely read this. I have heard some people want to read this before the other books. Skipping the standalones, don't do it. Skipping the trilogies, just no. Read all the other stuff first. You can skip Sharp Ends. You're allowed to skip Sharp Ends, nothing else. Well, technically, the story of this will make sense. Technically. One of the best aspect of it is that a lot of the side characters are characters whose head we've been in before, and if you haven't read from their perspective, you will miss a lot. And you'll miss out on a lot of the enjoyment that comes from this book. plotting itself. So that was relationships was one thing I think it does better. The second is plotting. This goes from The Blade itself, which is a great book, but has a very, very lackluster plot, almost a non-existent plot. This has some great, like, interconnected plot, and stuff from, like, different locations is affecting others, and it's very well plotted. So, Little Hatred, I gave 9.2 out of 10. It is my favorite Abercrombie book to date. So in a lot of months, that would have been the best book that I read about, that I was talking about, but it isn't even second for this month. And one of the books I like more than A Little Hatred, well, it's a reread, so it's cheating, but whatever, is Curse's Fury, Book 3 of the Codex Alera. I don't know why more people haven't read this. A lot of people really like Dresden, and then they just don't read any of Jim's other stuff. And it is... I like Dresden more, but it's very, very close. Codex Alera, it's just such a solid series. I think the biggest strength... I'm not going to talk about the specifics, because not many people have read it, and it's book 3. But I think the biggest strength to this series is the side characters, which is not super surprising, since his other series is all first person and has really well-developed side characters whose point of view you never see. So, if there's one thing Jim can do, it is develop and give personality to characters through the eyes of others. And he does it really, really well in this book. Especially this book also, like, it's just great from start to finish. Like, the prologue is fantastic, and the last chapter is, like, amazing. And just everything in between. I gave this 9.3 out of 10. It is my favorite book in the series, although it is second favorite book in the series. It goes back and forth between this and Princeps Fury. I have two favorites for this series. But I would absolutely recommend anyone read this series. I do think it suffers from the same thing Dresden does. Jim Butcher is not known for his strong first books, but he makes up for that in that he also doesn't have middle book syndrome. In that, like, you know, book 2 is better than book 1, and then book 3 is better than book 2, and then they just kind of stay pretty close to that level of quality. But I absolutely recommend this. It's great. Next up was Elantris. This is almost the last thing I had in the Cosmere. I was almost not reading this as a meme at this point. I've read virtually everything else in between like 2 and 9 times. But I finally got around to reading Elantris, just randomly, and it was okay. It was pretty good. It was fine. It has definitely some good things and some bad things, and the biggest problem I have with this book is that 40% of it is from the view of Serene, and I think Serene is Brandon's just least interesting point of view character he has written in the Cosmere, because she just doesn't have a lot going on. Like, she barely has character flaws. She has character quirks. Like, being bad at art is not a flaw, especially when you're just instantly good at politics. And Hrathen, on the other hand, my boy, gets almost nothing. Why, Brandon? Why can't Hrathen get more? That being said, it is a Brandon Sanderson book. So, the third act is completely fantastic, as it always is. It's not as completely fantastic, in my opinion, as some of his other third acts, but that is a high bar. I think, pretty much every Brandon book, they always have, like, reveals where it's like everything just kind of, like, clicks together, and you're like, that was so obvious, how did I not see that in hindsight, but then you actually never see it coming. This had some good reveals, but it didn't click in the same way that a lot of his other books. Like, there was no me telling myself, like, how did I not see that coming? It was duh. But still, the first 20 chapters were rough. Once we got past the 20 chapters, it didn't feel like a slog at all. Even though I think it's his weakest characterization, and compared to some of his earlier books, doesn't have the same level of polish. Like, for an example, there's a spot where there's a character who's dropping exposition, and then he drops exposition to a character who should totally already know that better than the person dropping exposition. But what are you gonna do? It's his debut novel. Still my favorite author, but not the strongest book ever. I gave it 6.5 out of 10. So still overall enjoyed it, but just not on the same level as other books. I still see people who like this more than Warbreaker. I don't get that. I think Warbreaker is amazing, but you do you. The next book I read, I actually got lucky to read as early as I did because it was The Trouble with Peace, which I did not get an arc for because why would they give me an arc? But I finished it on September 14th, and the book came out on September 15th because my local bookstore, who I'm not going to say which local bookstore because I'm no snitch. I think I saw they were around, so I think they were allowed to, but they put this out like 4 days early. I was going to the bookstore to get Dune, and I saw this, and just, hello. And it's great. I don't quite love it as much as A Little Hatred, but it's kind of all the trilogy books are really close together on how much I like them. And I think this is probably my third favorite Abercrombie book. I don't think the relationships shined quite as strong as they did in A Little Hatred, but still very excellent. Like, it's Abercrombie, so characterization is just a given. And I think two characters really stood out in this book who didn't stand out in A Little Hatred. And I'm not going to say who. You're going to have to read it and then tell me if you agree with me or who you think I was talking about. But I don't think this really has a weak point of view. Broad isn't super interesting. I think he's pretty clearly the least interesting. But they're all really interesting and really good. And again, he's really, he planned this ahead a lot. I think he wrote all three before he actually, the first draft. It really shows. There's some really good reveals here, some really good plots tying together. Good illustration, and it just makes an overall really enjoyable book. I overall like The Age of Madness more than the first trilogy. The only thing that holds me back from liking it way more is the existence of Glokta, because I still don't like anyone as much as Glokta in the First Law world. But still, I would highly recommend The Age of Madness. I like it even more than the first trilogy. The sixth book that I read in September was on the Kindle, and it was for Mike Book Review's read-along for Knight's Shadow. This did not come up. That's Unsold by Will White. Anyway, sorry, Sebastien de Castell. Your book cover is not going to be in this video. Yeah, well, you probably don't want to watch this next part anyways, Sebastien, if you are somehow watching this, because, I read this for the read-along, and I know a lot of people really like it. I know there's, Alex Nieves' YouTube channel. I might have even pronounced that right. Alex Nieves' YouTube channel, but I did not like this. Was pretty mixed on book one, but I was I really liked some things about it, and then I really hated some things about it. Book two was more just kind of negative about everything. I thought my biggest problem with it is just Falkio's kind of main internal conflict was totally uninteresting to me. And actually, no, not even uninteresting, infuriating. It was book one, it had the biggest problems was the Deus Ex Machinas and I can't believe this sentence exists that I'm about to say, but the magical, future-seeing prostitute, rapist, healer. And a big part of book two is does he love that rapist, prostitute, healer, magic person more than he loved his, at the same amount he loved his wife? And I was just, it hurts that I was not a fan. Why is that a thing? And then also the side characters, they certainly have personality. And I love me some Castell, love me some Bracky, but my problem is that their dialogue everyone's dialogue with Falkio started getting really, really repetitive, where it seemed like there were so many conversations where it's like someone calls Falkio an idiot. Falkio says something moderately intelligent. They go, oh, I guess you're not that much of an idiot. And then he's like, why do you guys follow me? Why do you treat me as the leader? And then they're just like, we take it back, you are an idiot. And, I got sick of it. I will say, it did better at not having Deus Ex Machina. There was a similar kind of thing as there was at the end of book 1, but this time it was actually set up. I don't know if it actually makes sense, but it's a turn your brain off fun romp. So I do think it lacks internal consistency, but I think it would be... We're into nitpicking territory for why it doesn't make sense, and I don't think I need to go into nitpicking territory for this book, because I think it has a lot of things that aren't nitpicks. But, glad other people enjoyed it. I will not be participating in Mike's read-along for the last 2. I've heard mixed things about book 3 already, but some people seem to have it as their favorite. I will probably never know what I think. So, there you go. Nice Shadow, Sebastien still. After that, I had the actual last book in the Cosmere I needed to read, other than White Sand, because that's a graphic novel and doesn't count. I'll get to it eventually. But that was the Arcanum Unbounded. I had read a decent amount of this before. I read Edge Dancer, Secret, all the Mistborn stuff. That might be it. But this had one big standout, and that was the Emperor's Soul. Holy crap, the Emperor's Soul was good. The Emperor's Soul, it just carried this. I mean, there were other stuff that's good too, but the Emperor's, nothing was even in the same stratosphere. The Emperor's Soul, the premise I have to give that isn't a spoiler is the worst representation of what it's actually about. But it's about someone who's in prison who needs to perform a task to not be in prison. But it has multiple, just fantastic character arcs. Just a beautiful ending, exploration of the, what makes something art, the human identity. It's just... After I read The Emperor's Soul, I just had to, sit there and think about it for a while. Anyway, this does contain other stuff, too. And I think a lot of them are barely worth mentioning. Hope of Elantris is 10 pages. Same with a lot of the Mistborn stuff. The other big things in here is Mistborn Secret History, which is a bit controversial because it is a Cosmere info dump at times. But I'm fully in on the Cosmere, so I'm down for some Cosmere info dumps, and I love Secret History. Secret History answered questions I didn't even know I had, and after reading it, I'm like, how could I not know that? Side note, read Secret History after Bands of Mourning. What Brandon says, what I say. There will be people who are dark friends who tell you to read Secret History after Hero of Ages. Don't do it. I will find out. Don't. After Bands of Mourning. That's when you read Secret History. Anyway, that was way more intense than it needed to be. But After Secret History was the most disappointing. A graphic novel in a book for White Sand with I had no idea what was going on while reading this. And then the actual prose part of White Sand, that was pretty mediocre. It was my least favorite thing in here. Not a big fan of the White Sand stuff. But after that, I believe we have Edge Dancer. And Edge Dancer. Actually, technically, we have the standalones. But I'm going to talk about Edge Dancer next. Edge Dancer should be read in a very specific time. Afterwards of Radiance. For Oathbringer. Obviously. That's when it says to read it. Edge Dancer is a bit controversial because it has a character, and there are two sides of it. There's the Lift is the worst thing ever, and Lift is an icon. And I am undecided. I could go either way. I await for Stormlight 6. So I don't mind Lift. I don't love Lift, but I think she's underrated. And I really like Edgedancer. Edgedancer, its biggest flaw is it's a side quest. When you read it, you're not thinking about the story of Edgedancer. You're like, I care what's happening relative to Words of Radiance. And you get a little bit, but that's really its biggest flaw. So Edgedancer. And then there are the two standalones. You have the Shadows for Silence and the Forest of Hell. And you have Six of Dust. I liked the Shadows more. I liked just the protagonist more. I found her more interesting. And it's probably the darkest thing Brandon has ever written. They're both pretty dark. Like, he went a lot darker than he normally does for those short stories. But I would totally recommend them. I think they're really good reads. Interesting, I think Six of Dust is chronologically in the Cosmere the furthest along we have been. So that's interesting. And Shadow's really interesting world. I really enjoy the protagonist. Would recommend. I gave this entire collection an 8.2 out of 10, which is better than the average. I think it's carried by the Emperor's Soul. It'd be like a 7 point something without. I don't think I had a single 7 point something this month, which is pretty rare, but it's really good. But the first thing is the best thing by far. This is a long wrap up, but I read a lot of books this month. Because next we have my reread of Peace Talks, coming up for Battleground. I waited 6 years for this book, and very mixed opinions. I overall liked it, but I'd been promised the most supernaturally violent Dresden book yet for 6 years, and I did not get that here. So I was really waiting for that for 6.5 years. But I still think Peace Talks is a good Dresden. It's a good Dresden book. Not a good relative to other late Dresden books, but Jim's just set the standard high enough that like a proven guilty quality of book is a disappointment at this case, because everything post Small Favor is just incredible. This is one of my favorite series. I love the thing, and I gave this an 8.9. If I'm being honest, I may drop that a little bit, but I still think it has some really good character development of side characters. I think some people accuse of inconsistent characterization, and I think a large part of that is there's some people who Harry has a view of that is, well, wrong of people around him, and we kind of start seeing them act like Harry starts to notice things about them, and it's a little bit surprising, but I think if you go back on your next reread and you look at those people just objectively based on their actions in Peace Talks will make a lot more sense, because I think everyone really acted like themselves, especially on reread. I thought some things were in the foreshadowing was better on reread. Overall, is it like a top tier Dresden up with like changes or skin game? No, but I still thought for a book it was quite good, and I stand by that. I thought it was really good. After that, we continued the reread of the Codex Alera. We went to book 4, Captain's Fury. I don't quite like it as much as Cursor's Fury, but it's still damn fantastic because this series is great. I had to take 5 days to read this. It might have even need to take 6, because I only had time to read one book in between Peace Talks and Battleground, and I didn't want to have nothing to read for 2 days. And I couldn't take that long. I had to, the longest I could take was 4 days. So I guess actually I read The River of Souls, the Wheel of Time short story, after that. But this, it's really fantastic, guys. You should go read it. And it's got Romans. Who doesn't like Romans? So many great side characters. It's just, why is it not more popular? I don't understand. And you take anything out of this video, it's that you should read Codex Alera, but also take out Secret History After Bands of Mourning, and to read the First Law Trilogy and the standalones. But this is more important. Do it. So Captain's Fury was a 9 out of 10 for me, and then we come to the last book I read for this month. I read it in about 5 hours, in one sitting, and it was Battleground by Jim Butcher. And, some people were disappointed after Peace Talks. Those people are not disappointed after Battleground, because holy shit, it's so good. It really... Battleground is one of those books that just hit the full range of emotions, from like crying to laughter to triumph to this is badass. It was just, oh, it's so good. Side note, how much better have these covers gotten? Like, I'm gonna go. There's Stormfront. There's Battleground. The improvement of the covers is almost as good as the improvement of the novel, of the books. But Battleground, it is my second favorite Dresden to date. It did not unseat changes, but it came closer than any book before it. And it's the same book that I put at a comparable level to changes. I obviously can't talk about details because it's book 17 of a series, and that would spoil all of those books. But so I can't spoil the entire series, but it's just really fantastic. Especially, I know I've talked a lot about this for Jim Butcher, but I think it's probably one of his biggest strengths as an author. Some of the side characters who didn't have a ton going on, they really got some good stuff in this book. I'm satisfied for my next wait. I still would like Mirror now. If you can do that for me, Jim. But this scratched the Harry getting the crap beaten out of him and breaking things itch. The peace talks scratched a little bit, but after Battleground, I was more than satisfied. I get the book in half. I know a lot of people think it should have been one book, and it definitely does work out as one book. I do think it would have been a little bit sudden if it was like one book. You'd get like halfway through the story here, and you'd be like, wait, all that stuff in the first half was the same book as this? So I think it is two stories. It's kind of like, there are two stories. It's just the start of the second story starts 3/4 of the way into the first story, and then it's a more interesting and just grand, bigger stake story. So people kind of are like, once that starts, they're like, yeah, whatever, I don't care about this first story. Where's the second bit? And then, then there doesn't really, that story doesn't really continue until the start of here, because it kind of goes on pause for a sec. But Battleground by Jim Butcher, just fantastic. This is what I read for the month of September. It was a very good reading month for me. In the comments below, let me know how your September was. Did you read anything good? Did you read anything terrible? Please don't downvote this, Alex. And see you in the next video, guys. Enjoy your reading.